Hi everyone, thank you for joining me. We all love beautiful scenes, but scene building can be daunting. Picket Fence Studios has a large number of products that are designed specifically for this purpose. Scene building just got a whole lot easier, so let's get started with this Christmas card depicting a nighttime winter scene. Paint is applied to Canson XL watercolor. It's oversized, about 6 by 9 inches. I'm going to be using these to die cut both my mountains and my trees. I'm working with Gonzai Tombi watercolors. Before I began my session, I put in a few droplets of water in each of the pans of the colors that I would be working with. This helps to soften the paint. It makes it much easier to work with. This is a great choice of watercolor if you want really vivid colors. I'm using a wet on dry technique, which simply means the paint is wet and it goes onto dry paper. This will help me get to the level of intensity that I want with only 2 coats of paint. To really get that color saturated, I do dry between the coats using my heat tool. I'm using a couple of shades of blue and purple on the top section of my watercolor paper, and then for the bottom section, a couple of shades of green. This paper will be die cut using a couple of profiles from the Scene Building Mountains die set and also the new Evergreens on a Hill cover plate. I also use the newly released Scene Building a Street Lamp and also an older die called Slimline Our Town cover plate to cut black cardstock. And finally, white cardstock was die cut using a third profile from the Mountains die set. And now that the scene has been pulled together, it's time to create a background. This time I'm using a wet on wet technique. The paint is applied to wet paper. One color overlaps the next one to create a color wash. When watercolor dries, it does lighten. To create that deep nighttime sky, I will be applying another coat of paint. For my sky, I'm using a very dark blue, purple, and red. I lay out my scene just to see how it's going to sit against my background. I want the evergreens to sit on a snowy hill, so I take that same die and I cut it out of white cardstock and then trim the evergreen trees off. As I do my trimming, I follow the curve of the hill. I've selected the section from the Our Town die cut that I'm going to use in my scene, and I use yellow paper and back the areas where the windows are. Next, I'm going to add some snowy texture. Using Versamark ink, I'm stamping both of my white cardstock panels using Scene Building Winter Scenery. I'm going to be using a puff embossing powder. This embossing powder does exactly what the name says. It puffs up, it has a matte finish, and it provides a pretty texture for the snow. The embossing powder that I'm using has sparkle added to it. So it does have that matte finish, but when the light hits it, there is some twinkling going on there. It is really pretty. I'm also going to add some texture to the top of the hillsides. I rub the ink pad along the top and then coat it with embossing powder. After one hillside is done, I go ahead and do the other one. And it just wouldn't be a winter scene without lots of snow. All of the die cut pieces and the background have been placed inside of a spatter box. For a nice bright spatter, I'm using Dr. Martin's Bleed Proof White. It has been watered down slightly and then applied using a fan brush. And now it's time to put all of those die cuts together. I begin by layering on the white hillside onto the evergreen die cut. The 2 mountain die cuts are going to be adhered to the background. I purposely have not trimmed down any of my die cuts to the width of the card. I trim as I go. This gives me some flexibility to get the profiles for each of the die cuts exactly how I want them. I won't be using my paper cutter to trim down the evergreens on a hill die cut. I'm going to use my scissors as a precaution because I'm cutting through 2 layers of cardstock. I don't want any ragged ends. I want a nice clean cut. The card front is flipped to the back side and I push the blade of my scissors right up against the cardstock's edge. The slimline Our Town die cut is adhered and trimmed down. The last layer is going to be adhered to Picket Fence Studios extra wide foam tape. To make it easier to trim, I use some leftover backing paper and place it over the sticky surface. And the backing paper is removed from the other side and it's popped into place. I have just a little corner of that foam that is showing, so I'm just going to trim that off. The last scene building element that I'm going to be incorporating into this scene is this gorgeous street lamp die cut. The same yellow cardstock that was used in the windows of the town buildings was also used just to cut the lamp lights. The finials are trimmed off the top and the bottom, and a little bit of tape is used just to hold all the die cuts together, and then it is adhered to the back of the lamplight. The bottom of the lamp post is going to be adhered to the foreground, which is foam backed. I want the top portion of the lamp post to be stable. I die cut the lamp post using the extra wide foam tape. When working with a fine image, I like to leave the die cut in the foam backing. When the die cutting has been done, it actually leaves an impression. This makes it very easy to align the cardstock lamppost to the foam one. Remove this fine die cut from the excess foam. It is easiest to cut into those tight areas with scissors first. After removing the backing paper from the foam, which is at the top of the lamppost, a little bit of liquid adhesive is applied to the base and it is positioned on the card. So now I'm going to apply snowy accents to just about everything. I'm using a small mixed media brush to apply winter snowfall paper velvet. The bristles on this brush are stiffer, making it easier to pick up the paper velvet. I want these drifts of snow to have texture and dimension, so as I apply it, I do so in a pouncing motion. After all the snowy accents have been applied, I follow up with some paper glitz sparkle just to add a touch of shine. A pale yellow water brush pen was used to add in some light reflection at the bottom of the lamppost. That completes this Christmas card featuring Picket Fence Studios scene building products. Creating a scene just couldn't be any easier. I hope you enjoyed this video, and as always, I appreciate your visit.